A sports jersey combines gold and purple. A video game assigns point values to colored jewels, purple among them. And somewhere in the space between those two modern uses of a color, the memory of something extraordinary has almost disappeared. Today, purple sits beside every other shade in the spectrum. It appears on athletic uniforms, in digital interfaces, across product packaging and brand palettes. The Los Angeles Sparks wear gold and purple jerseys without ceremony or explanation. A video game in the mid-2000s assigned a dark purple jewel a point value of 1250, wedged between green and gold in a sequence of scoring tokens. In both cases, purple functions as decoration, one option in a palette, a design choice no more remarkable than cyan or orange. We treat color as abundant because it is. Synthetic dyes flood the market at pennies per kilogram. A child's watercolor set contains a dozen hues, purple included, for less than the cost of lunch. Fabric, plastic, paint, and pixels all render purple with equal ease. The color carries associations, royalty, luxury, creativity. But those associations have softened into metaphor, branding shorthand divorced from material consequence. But for most of recorded history, purple was not a choice. It was a commodity more tightly controlled than silver, more labor-intensive than silk, and in specific places and moments, gram for gram, worth more than gold. The color existed in nature, on flower petals, in certain minerals, across the feathers of tropical birds. But none of those sources could be harvested, processed, and fixed to cloth in a way that survived washing, sunlight, and time. The human desire to wear purple, to drape it across walls and banners, to signal status through a single saturated hue, ran headlong into a fundamental scarcity. The problem was chemistry. Most plant-based dyes produce color by bonding loosely to fiber, and most of those bonds degrade quickly under ultraviolet light or repeated washing. A few natural substances, madder root for red, woad for blue, certain insect bodies for crimson, could be coaxed into stable dyes through careful mordanting, the use of metallic salts to lock pigment to thread. But purple, especially the deep saturated violet that later cultures would call royal purple, required a completely different mechanism, one that ancient dyers did not understand chemically but learned to exploit through empirical trial across generations. The earliest documented source of stable purple dye came not from a plant or mineral, but from the hypobranchial gland of marine mollusks in the family Muricidae, a group of predatory sea snails that inhabited the rocky coastlines of the Mediterranean. The Phoenicians, a maritime culture based in the coastal cities of what is now Lebanon, developed the industrial extraction process sometime in the 2nd millennium BCE. Archaeological evidence, middens of crushed shells, stone vats with residue, and textile fragments bearing purple dye, places production centers at Tyre, Sidon, and other Phoenician ports by at least 1600 BCE. The process was brutal in its inefficiency. Each mollusk produced only a few drops of secretion. Workers harvested the snails by hand, cracked the shells, and extracted the gland tissue. Thousands of mollusks were required to dye a single garment. The secretion itself was not purple when harvested. It emerged as a pale yellowish mucus that turned green, then blue, then deep violet only after exposure to sunlight and air, a photochemical transformation that ancient dyers observed but could not explain. The workshops reeked of decaying shellfish, a stench so pervasive that dye works were often built downwind of population centers. The color that resulted was unlike anything else available. It did not fade. It did not wash out. It deepened with age and wear, a property that made it both a luxury and a marker of enduring wealth. The dye molecules bonded to protein fibers, wool and silk, through a mechanism that modern chemists identify as vat dyeing, a process in which insoluble pigment is temporarily reduced to a soluble form, allowed to penetrate the fiber, then reoxidized into a permanent insoluble color. Ancient dyers did not know the chemical steps, but they knew the result, a purple that lasted as long as the fabric itself. The price reflected the labor. A single pound of Tyrian purple dye, The name later given to the Phoenician product required the harvest of roughly 250,000 mollusks. In the Roman Empire at its height, a pound of purple-dyed wool cost more than a pound of gold. Sumptuary laws restricted its use. By the reign of Emperor Nero in the 1st century CE, only the emperor himself could wear garments dyed in the deepest shade of Tyrian purple, a restriction enforced not through moral concern, but through economic control. The dye was a state resource. Wearing it without authorization was not a fashion violation. It was theft of imperial property. The Phoenician monopoly did not last forever, but its collapse came slowly. As Phoenician city-states declined in political power, production spread to other Mediterranean centers, North Africa, southern Italy, the Greek islands. The knowledge remained specialized, passed through guilds and families, but the geographic bottleneck widened. The price stayed high, but availability increased enough that wealthy patricians, high-ranking officials, and successful merchants could acquire purple-dyed cloth without imperial favor. The color remained a luxury, but it was no longer the exclusive property of a single throne. The molecular structure of the dye, a compound called 6,6-dibromoindigo, was not isolated and identified until 1909, when a French chemist named Paul Friedlander processed 12,000 mollusks to extract 1.4 grams of pure dye crystals. By that time, synthetic indigo had already been in mass production for more than a decade, and the synthetic route to dibromoindigo followed soon after. The ancient scarcity became a historical curiosity. A color that once required an emperor's treasury could be printed onto polyester at industrial scale. The transformation was not gradual. The introduction of synthetic dyes in the mid-19th century, beginning with William Henry Perkins' accidental synthesis of Mauveine in 1856, collapsed the entire natural dye economy within 2 generations. Aniline dyes derived from coal tar offered brilliant, repeatable color at a fraction of the cost and labor. Tyrian purple, which had survived as a marginal luxury product into the industrial age, disappeared from commercial production entirely. The last known traditional harvest of dye-producing mollusks occurred in the early 20th century, and by mid-century, no one alive retained the full craft knowledge of ancient dye preparation. What remains is the cultural residue. The association between purple and royalty persists in language, heraldry, and brand identity, even though the material conditions that created that association vanished more than a century ago. A basketball team wears purple without knowing why the color once signified power. A video game assigns point values to colored jewels in a sequence that echoes nothing about the ancient economy of dye. The color itself has become cheap, ubiquitous, and semantically unmoored from the labor that once made it precious. The historical record is unambiguous. For roughly 3,000 years, purple dye extracted from marine mollusks was one of the most valuable substances in the Mediterranean economy. Costly enough to serve as currency, restricted enough to function as a tool of political control, and labor-intensive enough that its price per unit weight exceeded that of gold in specific markets and periods. The color was not metaphorically precious. It was materially scarce, and that scarcity shaped law, trade, and the visible grammar of power. The end of that scarcity did not come from the exhaustion of resources or the decline of empires. It came from the synthesis of a molecule in a laboratory, a discovery that rendered 3 millennia of specialized knowledge obsolete in less than a human lifetime. The color remained. The value evaporated, and the memory of why purple once commanded the price of gold has faded into the background of a world where every color costs the same. We live in the aftermath of that transformation. When a modern designer selects purple for a logo or a jersey, they are choosing from a palette that assumes infinite availability. The choice carries no material risk, no economic consequence, no constraint beyond aesthetic preference. The color has become information, a hex code, a position on a spectrum that exists as easily in light as in pigment. But beneath that ease lies a history of scarcity so absolute that entire legal systems were built to control a single hue. The question is not whether we should mourn the loss of that scarcity. Synthetic dyes democratized color, made fashion accessible, and eliminated a form of labor that was by all accounts unpleasant and dangerous. The question is whether we recognize what we have lost in the translation, the knowledge that value is not intrinsic to an object, but contingent on the effort required to obtain it, and that the things we now take for granted were once worth more than the rarest metals on Earth. Purple is still purple, but it is no longer precious. And in that shift lies a lesson about how abundance, once achieved, erases the memory of the constraints that came before. We see the color. We have forgotten the cost, and the fact that a basketball jersey and a video game jewel now treat purple as ordinary is the final proof that the ancient world, in this one measurable way, has disappeared completely.